Right, everyone, thanks for being here. I am sharing my screen, so hopefully folks are seeing that here now, but I'm seeing a lot of faces pop up here as well in the gallery mode. It's nice to see a lot of people. Hope everyone's doing well out there. We were just kind of having some casual conversations here, and there's gonna be more time throughout tonight to kind of talk. We'll actually probably do a few more breakout groups as well as the night or as the evening goes on. But this is the December meeting for Passive House Massachusetts. We're here to talk about, well, kind of a variety of incentives around Passive House, training programs, and code development that's been happening over the last year. The reality is well, there's been a whole host of things going on this year. In terms of Passive House policy in Massachusetts, it's actually been a pretty good year. And we want to talk about some of the things that have happened and some of the things that we are working on for the coming year to 3 years. So me, Aaron, I'm going to do some of the talking here today, and then Hank Keating's going to do a lot of it as well. We want to keep it kind of informal as well and have you guys kind of give us a lot of ideas and feedback, so we have some time set up for that, but also ask questions as you like, and kind of jump in here with the conversation too. Oh, sorry, let me actually just do this. So the main things we're going to talk about is the Passive House Incentive Program, which is the program that's currently running through Mass Save that incentivizes multifamily passive house buildings. We're going to talk about the current state of that program and sort of what are the chances to update that program to include other buildings and other aspects. We're going to look at the Passive House training program, which has been producing a lot of different training content. So we'll talk about the current state of that and also what we're looking to do in the future with it. And then we're going to talk about just very quickly some state legislation. There's some interesting stuff going on that can impact Passive House. So we want to update you folks on that. And then we're going to end today by talking about the Easy Building Code, which is, well, we'll talk a little bit more about what it is. But for those attending these meetings in the past, you've heard us talk about maybe the Net Zero Building Code or updating the stretch code in Massachusetts for Net Zero and Passive House. This is what the Easy Building Code is all about. So we'll cover that as well. These are the main things we have here today. Again, thanks for being here. Ask questions if you have them. Use the chat room to talk amongst yourselves as well. But I'm just going to jump into it and we'll talk more as we go through it. All right, there we go. So quickly, before we get into too many of this is just one slide that gives you an overview of some of the things that have been happening related to Passive House in the state kind of around the last year or so. So first, the DHCD, which is Department of Housing and Community Development, approved changes to their QAP funding plan to award extra points for projects that seek Passive House certification. This is something that other states have done. You've heard us probably talk about Pennsylvania, or heard Tim McDonald talk about what he's done in Pennsylvania. They did a version of this. It was great to see Massachusetts finally do this. In Boston specifically, they've updated the city's Department of Neighborhood Development design standards to include Passive House. Is being mentioned there, which is really great. Somerville kind of similarly updated their zoning ordinance to include Passive House. Cambridge's zoning ordinance also has it as an alternative pathway. And then in Newton, we saw their climate action plan, including Passive House and incorporating into kind of the city's development. So a lot of sort of statewide, but then some community-specific changes. These aren't necessarily all of them, and if you guys know more in your neighborhoods, please let me know. These are some highlights. At the state level, and the two things we're going to talk about today are, one, the stretch code for buildings is considering adopting zero energy and passive house requirements. That's the easy code that we'll talk about at the end of today. And then the first thing we're going to talk about, which is the Mass Save program, which is introduced incentives for multifamily passive house projects. So these are sort of the big things going on in the state. Also, the building you're seeing is the Winthrop Center Tower, which is under construction and will be, by square footage, the largest passive house project, I believe, in the country, if not the world, when it's finished. So let's just jump right into the Mass Save current incentives. So this is a slide just as a reminder for everybody what the current incentives are. These are available right now for multifamily buildings that are 5 stories or higher. The website address there at the masssave.com/passive houses, all of this. But this is what, so when we talk about the current incentives, these are the numbers right here.
Aaron.
Yeah.
It's not 5 stories. We're getting that confused.
Oh, sorry, 5 units. Thank you, Hank. Yes. Thanks, Hank. Thank you. It's 5 units or more. regardless of stories, 5 units or more.
Right.
And that actually changed. So part of the reason I'm still getting confused is originally when they rolled it out, there were some different requirements, but they lowered it to be 5 units or more of any size building. So they began offering incentives around the third quarter of 2019. And they expanded that to include all of these multifamily buildings that are 5 units or more at the beginning of this year, around February or so. While we don't have exact data on the numbers, we've been able to see there's around 5,000 units or more that have been registered under this program, representing about 70 different projects. The first to be completed was this one you're seeing on the right, which is Finch Cambridge in Cambridge. Finished earlier this year, 98 units. And this was an affordable housing project as well. This Mass Save incentive program are not necessarily just affordable housing, it's all multifamily buildings, but we have seen a lot of affordable housing complexes sort of going for this. The largest that I know of so far would be Northland's Newton project, which is going to do over 300 units of passive house housing, some affordable and some not. But this is sort of the current reality of the incentive program, the results that we produced. We at Passive House Massachusetts are very happy with this, very excited to sort of see this. But we have an opportunity here to do more. So how did this happen? How did we get here? So this sort of comes around, the Mass Save program comes out of something called the Massachusetts Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, or the EEAC. They're a group that develops sort of the plans for how Massachusetts will spend these energy efficiency funds. They develop a plan that gets approved by the state's Department of Public Utilities, the DPU. These plans are developed on 3-year cycles. So the current program that I just showed you came out of the 2019 to 2021 cycle period. We here at PHMass and other groups sort of began pushing the EAC way back in 2018 to include passive house and other incentives in this plan. This included attending various EAC meetings, making public testimony, answering questions from the EAC members about passive house, writing comments and letters in support of it. Even I'm kind of vague here, but we actually sent out some actual proposals as well that we wanted to see, and then have people make comments. Many people actually, I see your names and faces on the group here. Actually, many of you made comments. And this was a huge, huge boost to getting this passed, is these comments and support. And I'll show you that in a moment. But the result was the approval of these passive house incentives. So the approved plan was then turned into an actual program by Mass Save, by the banner of Mass Save, and rolled out around mid-2019 with the first incentives. And as I mentioned, they were expanded to all multifamilies, 5 units or more at the beginning of this year. This is sort of the process of how we got to these incentives to be created. And I mentioned those comments being really, really important. So I just had this kind of chart to show you. During the comment period, they received 93 public comments, and you can see where the arrow is pointing. 25% of them were related to the passive house part of this. Overall, passive house is a small part of the Mass Save program and of the energy efficiency funds that the EAC was looking at doing. So the fact that 25% of the comments were dedicated to it, I mean, that was pretty much, I think, the decision maker making sure that these got passed, because this just had a lot. This had a big role in it. Many of you wrote these letters or made these comments. Thank you so much. This included comments. These are written comments. I should mention there were also public testimony that was given as well. So many people attended these meetings and spoke in favor of it as well. And this is something we're looking to replicate for this coming period. So that's what I want to move on to next. And Hank, I'm really going to let you kind of dive into more of this. But as we move into the current planning cycle, we're starting the planning cycle for the 2022 to 2024 plan. So this won't go into effect next year, but next year is the time in which we get to influence what this plan is.
Yeah, so this is the document you're looking at is something you can get to on the EAC website, and it's their planning document for this process. They have had this year basically 6 listening sessions and 7 working groups plus their regular meetings. And this is the overview schedule where they're looking to actually in February wrap up recommendations that they put into a draft plan give to the PAs, the project administrators for the MassSafe program, who are supposed to come back with a final plan in October. And then it will ultimately go to the DPU for approval and take effect sometime in January of 2022. So we are currently working under the previous 3-year plans through the rest of this year. Where does one submit written comments? That is at ma-eeac.gov. And that's on their website.
On another slide coming up, the link will be there.
Yeah. Okay, we can let's go to the next slide.
Oh,
So,
it's at the bottom there.
Yeah, there it is right there. That's where you can put in comments, and they record them they put them into a file that's available to everybody. So these are the remaining workshops that are up. But again, this schedule is available. The way that works is you can file written testimony to them at any time using that website, or you can go on and pre-register for a workshop or a listening session, or even one of their regular meetings, and you can do short public testimony. Typically, the way I think it makes sense to do it is to submit something in writing and then go to a meeting, and because they try to limit each speaker to like 3 minutes. So you have to do a very quick synopsis, but point to the idea that you've submitted a more detailed proposal in writing, and it's available to everybody listening by going to the EAC website. Okay, we can go to the next one. So these are going to be a series of recommendations that we have submitted over the last 6 weeks to them during listening sessions. And the first one is very simple. We're simply recommending that they continue the same Passive House incentive program that's been so successful in enrolling over 5,000 units in what amounts to not even 2 years, because they didn't start it right away, and we are still got a full year to go. So when you think about it, we have a really full 3-year plan. We could easily go from 5,000 to 7,000 to 10,000 units. So that's the positive response rate. Now, the fact is, from this original 3-year plan, we don't have a lot of results yet. The Finch being shown on the right is different because it had a jump start. It had actually started construction before it took advantage of getting some of these rebate dollars. And but most of these projects take 3 years of development from the point where they're in feasibility studies to the point where they're built and they're taking in occupancy and doing commissioning. So we don't have a lot of results, and we're saying to the EEAC, continue the program. We've got a lot of interest, and it's drumming up a lot of people who want to try Passive House. But the one suggestion we've made is transparency. One of the frustrations, it goes to why we can't say to you exactly how many units it is. Is it 5,000 units, 74 projects, et cetera? The MassSafe program has in it, it's almost like HIPAA regulations, privacy regulations about people who are enrolled. And even if these people have no problem with it, their procedures don't allow for it. So we have suggested in this recommendation that they change that and essentially say, listen, if you are a contractor or a developer and you want to take advantage of this incentive money, you need to release your information so we know who you are, where you are, what your project is, what your decision-making process has been. To share information, because all taxpayers are paying, ratepayers are paying for this, and we need access to the information. So that's the big change we're asking for. Let's look at the next slide. So the next thing we've suggested is that they expand this program by doing 1 to 4 units. So you can see this is the recommended program is, oh, I'm sorry, this is retro.
Sorry, let me go back here, Hank. Here we are.
Okay. Yeah. So what we've done is we've suggested that they add another program, which is a passive house incentive program for 1 to 4 units. So single family to multifamily up to 4 units. And right now we know that in 2019, 43%, 42% of the building permits issued in the state fell into this category. So it's a lot of units. It's over 7,000 units that are not available for a passive house program. So here we're recommending an incentive program, and it differs primarily in that we're suggesting that it would have to be on the order of $7,500 a unit instead of $2,500 a unit for certification. And we're noting one of the issues that Mass Dec brings up about smaller buildings is the cost of certification. So we're pointing out to them that PHMass has come up with a prescriptive path scenario for single family and townhomes, which a lot of these buildings would fall under, where modeling is not required and they can go through a prescriptive path. So we're hoping that they will think seriously about this. And yeah, now we can go on to the next one. Now, this is the big one. We've proposed a retrofit program. We all know that passive house retrofit is the new frontier. It's difficult and expensive, and yet we know that we have to tackle deep energy retrofits across the state, or we'll never be able to meet our long-term climate change goals. So we're recommending 2 programs, the way they break up the new incentive program, 5 units plus and 1 to 4 units. And you can see there that we have we've recommended some slight variations in terms of what they would get for a feasibility study and modeling. But in both cases, we're recommending that certification is reimbursed at $35,000 a unit. Now, this is obviously a tremendous departure from any program that they have right now. And we point out to them that this is really not unlike the proposals in New York City, the Retrofit New York program, which is at like $40,000 a unit. And we point out that this requires the cost effectiveness calculation to change. And I'm going to get into that in some more detail, but the bottom line is their first response to this suggestion is going to be, if we spend $35,000 or $40,000 per unit for retrofits, we will never see a payback for that in terms of straight energy. And the answer, that's true, you won't. But you will see a payback in terms of reduced carbon. And we need their cost effectiveness calculation to change from simply, is it break even or are we making money, to how much carbon are we saving? How do we value that? So that's the retrofit program we're suggesting. Okay, let's look at the next one. So this is not a proposal we've made. It's a proposal we're supporting. Wind Companies has done a lot of work with the lean proposal, the lean program rather, which is a program I don't have a whole lot of detail on, but it has to do with rehab and retrofit of affordable housing. And it's quite piecemeal the way it's set up right now. And this is a proposal for expanding the lean proposal so that it does all electric deep energy retrofits, still aimed at affordable housing. Same thing based upon the retrofit program, New York retrofit program. And they get into, Aaron, I don't think we've actually posted this on our website. We should. So we
haven't yet. I'll get it up there.
Yeah, we'll get it up there because there's a lot of detail in it about flexibility and creative funding mechanisms that is too much detail to try to go into here. But this too requires the cost effectiveness calculations to change. So we're proposing the Passive House retrofit program to sort of be a complement to this, because it would be for a market rate and affordable. Affordable projects they could decide to go to the lean program if it existed, or they could decide to go to the pacifist program. They wouldn't be able to do both, but the lean program is not available for market rate rehab. So that's what the retrofit program is meant to do, is to fill in that gap that doesn't get covered by lean. So we're supporting that and feel like everybody should support that proposal. Okay. Now this comes into this whole issue. Chapter 25, Section 21 of the general laws established the EAC and the 3-year planning process. And it established cost-effective calculation guidelines. And it says, first, utilize all available energy efficiency and demand reduction resources that are cost-effective or less expensive than supply. Now, I look at that language and say, it says first do that. Doesn't say that's all you can do. And in addition to that, because we have some evidence, well, we know that they have some flexibility. And I'm just looking for my copy. Well, here it is. The actual language that the legislation has in front of it is energy efficiency and demand reduction resources cost effective or less expensive than supply preferred. So not required, but preferred. So what we are saying is that if this Senate Bill 2500 comes out with this language in it, then the EEAC will be required to do as it states here, continuing that sentence, provided, however, that when determining cost effectiveness, the calculation of benefits shall include calculations of the social value of greenhouse gas reductions. So they're telling them they have to essentially put a value on the reduced carbon to justify a program. And if this comes out of the joint committee by the end of the year, this will be laid over this planning process to the EEAC, and that would be terrific. But there's a real possibility that it may not. So we've submitted a proposal to recommend that to the EEAC that whether or not this bill passes, they should try to adopt this language anyways, or at least the intent of this language. And they have options. I mean, they can look to the idea that it's preferred, not required. They can look to the idea that they're supposed to first look at these things, but that's not the only thing. They can also look at doing pilot projects where the payback, the cost effectiveness equation doesn't apply. And they can look at non-energy benefits as a way of funding programs where the benefits go beyond the cost effectiveness test. So we're really pushing them to say, look, whether or not the legislature passes this bill, you, the EEAC, in this planning cycle should look to a way to get beyond this cost effectiveness test, or it's going to be another literally 4 years before you're going to be able to consider any programs that go beyond that simple test and actually pay for their value in terms of reduced carbon.
Hank, are you open to some comments on these, what you're talking about?
Sure.
So I'm a energy rater here in Western Mass, and I don't see cost effectiveness as a real impediment here. So there's two things. One, the current Mass Save new construction rebate program maxes out at $10,000 per 1 to 4 unit building, right? Per unit, up to $10,000. So already they've determined that high performance buildings are cost effective to warrant a $10,000 rebate, which these would all qualify for, I assume. At least the larger, smaller buildings, 1 to 4 unit. So, you know, your low rise 1 to 4 proposal, I think, is fantastic, but it's really not that much of an ask. I mean, it's the total value, if we go back a couple slides, of all those incentives are around 12,000. And that's probably cost effective for the savings they're going to get for each of these units. Jumping to the retrofit program, 35,000. Sure, that's not deemed cost effective, but I think the scope of those projects, as we all know, are totally aligned with like past pilot programs they've done, particularly the DER program from 10 plus years ago, where they were giving $50,000 to $100,000 per house for deep energy retrofits. And the scope of those projects, because they're new and super challenging and not quite the market's not ready for them, they qualify wonderfully as a pilot, therefore not needing to be held under the TRC cost effectiveness.
Right, you're exactly right. That's the flexibility they have. So that's what I think we want to be saying to them in this round of comments. We want to be saying to them, and the points you make are great. You've done this in the past, do it again. You've done the pilots. What was interesting is that when we first came in with the Passive House Incentive Program, as Aaron indicated 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we had those discussions with them and they were saying, no, we don't want to do pilots. No, we don't want to do it as non-energy benefits, et cetera. But we know they have, as you point out, the flexibility to do that. So I think we need to put the pressure on them to do it for these types of programs. Okay, we can go.
I'll also add that I think the FIAS prescriptive 2021 prescriptive path is a huge opportunity here to reduce design costs. I'm sure everyone on the call is a CPHC and might have mixed feelings about it. But as someone in the field that's usually talks people out of passive house certification because of their goals, I think reducing design soft costs is huge. And the prescriptive path that they just presented is, I think Massachusetts will be really interested in that as a way to, one, know what they're getting, you know, there's a package there, and also to make more cost effective, put more money into the project, less money into soft costs.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a great thing that that's becoming available now, and I think it merges well with these types of programs. And I would go back for 1 second and add one more comment to what we were suggesting. I hear you about the single family house saying maybe getting $12,000 instead of 10 under an existing program. But that means that with a 4-unit project that you may be up in the $38,000 range. So that would be a great thing if people, so I think of Bev Craig's Mass CEC triple decker. If the triple decker programs could be getting, you know, $25,000, $30,000 per project as a under that program, be great.
Yeah, the current Mass Save rebates are $10,000 per unit, up to 4 family.
Well, that's close. Okay, this is another recommendation we made to them, which is that we've heard from many developers doing significant multifamily passive house and trying to get to the next step of all electric, that one of the major stumbling blocks is central hot water. So we're trying to come up to see if there's a way to get them to do a specific incentive program that would help with that particular problem. That would be something you could, you know, add on to a passive house incentive program. And one of the tricky parts of it is that some people tell you that you can install, the capital cost of such a system is not necessarily higher than a gas system, although many people will say it is. but nobody argues that the operating cost of it is higher with the all electric versus the gas. So how do you incentivize something that where the owner is taking on a longer term operating cost? And we've suggested that this can be done potentially through qualifying more types of systems like hot water and air source heat pumps and wastewater heat reclamation under the APPS program, so that there's a way. This, I don't know how viable this is, but we hope to get them thinking about it and trying to come up with some creative way to offer some type of incentive to help developers take that next step, which is for many of them, the last step that they would need to take for all electric. Okay, Aaron?
Yeah, the next section we had was just kind of wanted to get more of your feedback. So we thought the best way was just to kind of have a short 5 minutes or so breakout groups, and then we can come back and kind of share some common thoughts. Would be a good idea to get more comments out here. So really, what other changes or additions would you like to see? What comments, like have been made so far to these current proposals we made? What do you have? What thoughts do you have? So I'm just going to create some breakout groups. We'll go for 5 minutes. We'll come back. All right. Hello, everybody. You should be back here in the main group. So I hope that went well. And I'm kind of curious to hear if there was anything that came up that folks would like to talk about. Maybe we just go like room by room here. Actually, I'll start with the second room here. I know Doug and you were in that room with others. If anybody from that room would like to talk. Go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Doug.
Sorry, Aaron. Every time I touched it, it double muted. Anyway, we had about enough time to introduce ourselves and kind of exchange a little bit of information. I did my best to explain in a simple terms what the effort is here, and I think sharing my reasons for being here, Josh, and Josh, don't let me put words in your mouth. You know, the lobbying and advocacy side of this, which is, you know, we're kind of neck deep in right now. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of organizations, there's a lot of bureaucracies, there's a lot of navigating, and there's a lot of money out there that's available. So, you know, I spent the last 30 seconds just telling Josh how fantastic a job I thought that you and Hank do on a regular basis.
Thank you, Doug. That's not the purpose of this meeting, but thanks. And yeah, and I completely agree with those comments. I mean, I know even for myself, this is a lot of new things to get involved with. And it can be tough to wade all these waters. And I think for the folks here joining us today who don't, you know, have a lot of experience working with these type of issues, that's okay. We're willing to take on the brunt of that, and you can make a comment in support of something, that's good. But really, if you can think of if you struggle in to get your projects off the ground, and there's something that would be beneficial incentive wise that might change that, there's an opportunity to push for it. Maybe that's might be the gist of what we're getting here. I don't know. Room 3, I see Mike, Marcel, a few others in that room. Does anyone there want to share anything? You're on now.
Marcel, go ahead.
We kind of continued a little too long on the hot water discussion, but I was also, we talked about a new technology where we learned about there, the solar assisted heat pumps. So that might be something interesting for our group to explore, see if there could be some incentives for that, is getting around this issue. I was recently communicating with someone from Minnesota Passive House Group, and they're trying to get a incentive going up to 90,000, but I'm learning that's for like the whole project. So just trying to compare.
That's a big number.
Yeah, what other groups are doing. I think theirs is like their proposal is 5,000 for a 1 to 3 unit building, up to 90,000 maybe cap on it. So but that's about it.
Yeah, that's great. The kind of the way different states are doing this is very interesting, because this is really, it's happening kind of differently. When we originally started this process a few years ago, we looked a lot to like what New York was doing. So they have NYSERDA, if folks work down there, is kind of similar to Mass Save in some ways. So we kind of looked to what they were doing as the biggest model. But you look everywhere, different states that are doing this are doing it much differently. Curious to hear you guys talked a lot about hot water. That was something that we heard a lot about as well, which is kind of why it was a challenge on a lot of these multifamily projects, at least.
And one quick thing to add there, if in a multifamily building, the use of gas is unavoidable for hot water, it would be nice if you had an incentive or guidance such that you made that system easily convertible to electricity. Like, don't plan for 180-degree water out of the machine, you know, plan for lower temperature water. Maybe just make a wiring tray or conduit so you can bring sufficient electricity into that room. Some design guidance there that is easy and inexpensive and maybe subsidized when the building is constructed can make eventual conversion much less expensive and therefore much more attractive. What I'm seeing coming out of the Global Warming Solutions Act Implementation Advisory Committee is that all the gas has to get out of all the buildings. we're just making mistakes if we don't make it easy to do that at least.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're going to actually get into training here in a little bit, but I wonder if there's like training sessions around some of those changes that would be helpful. Okay. I know I don't want to take a whole lot of time with this, but if I know group 4, there's Adam, Heather, Oliver, you guys there, if anybody wants to kind of jump in and talk about some of the things that came out of there as well. Basically, I just want to give every group an opportunity to share some of the things they talked about, if you want to. Room 5, Aiden, Beverly, Bev, Luke.
After introductions, I think we ended up focused on the single family CS prescriptive approach, which was, I think, has a lot of potential and is exciting. And I'm very curious at how well it will be adopted. But
Yeah.
Bev or Aiden, do you want to add any more?
Yeah, Bev brought up the fact that the renovations and additions program just changed their baseline, which he thinks is gonna really hurt the program, especially for higher performance projects. So that's just good to know. And then Luke had some specific comments about the prescriptive path, which I haven't dug into yet, but we all should, because the comment period is open now just for another week or so, I believe. So, you know,
No, I think it just closed yesterday.
Oh, really?
I submitted comments yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, so it was open for a week only, I think, or
Yeah.
Now, technically, it was open for a month, but it was a hidden gem for the first 3 weeks. And I will speak to that a little bit later. We in a role with the easy residential code, we reviewed it and made some comments, and I'll share you what some of those comments were a little later in the presentation. But yeah, that's closed right now, closed on Monday.
Right. We'll have longer discussion time at the end as well. I just want to kind of get through some of this. Don't want to keep everyone all night. So I'm going to go on to the next section, which is about the training program. So in addition to pushing for these Mass Save for these project incentives through Mass Save way back when we started this process, we also pushed for the creation of a training program. So funding for training for consultants and builders and designers and engineers and everybody involved in these projects. So in the same process we were pushing for the incentives, we pushed for this. And in the same way it got approved, there was funding allocated, and eventually the program got created. The training program actually took even longer. It didn't kick off until around September of 2019. It took a lot longer for that to kind of get ironed out in terms of what it was and where the funds were going. So, but from about September of 2019 through now, we've completed 24 lunch and learns through this program, 14 workshops. They have trained around 1,500 participants. So lunch and learns are just kind of shorter sessions, generally about an hour. Workshops have been longer, 2 hours, half day. There's been a couple multi-session workshops. So a variety of things there. Many of you have attended these. The top photo there was one of the first ones we did in person with Tim McDonald and David Salaman. Then there's a couple on the bottom. We just finished that pattern language for Passive House course, which was a 4-session workshop, a very, very good one there with Monty Paulson. So these are different things. The titles you see here are ones that we've been putting on. This is a snapshot of them. I know many of you guys have attended these, but you haven't attended all of them. So I want to give you an idea of what this training program has been producing. So these are some of them there. The good thing about this is, in addition to putting on these trainings, we were able to sort of work with the Mass Save program to come up with a way to record these and make them available widely to everyone. They sort of agreed, and we worked with their partner ICF, who's our partner with this, to create this Passive House Learning Center. So most of these trainings I just showed you were recorded and are posted on here. You may see some on our website as well, but this is sort of the dispensatory for all of them. And it's a great way to kind of have all this content. And as we build out this library, it allows us to kind of organize them a lot better, have, you know, keywords and topics and things that we'll be kind of developing as the next year or so goes on. But this has been kind of a great thing that's come out of it. So hopefully folks have, experience using this, and I know there's some kinks to work out still with it. In addition to the lunch and learns and workshops, we were able to receive funding for certification courses. So this was a 50% reimbursement to attendees for the FIAS and PHI certification courses, and then funding to help bring those courses here to Massachusetts. This was a huge part of it. We wanted people to actually go through some of these trainings and become certified. So to be able to get half off was a pretty good deal. And again, this started around late 2019, but through February 2020, so a very short window, we did 3 CPHC courses through this program here. These are all ones here in Massachusetts: a builder's course, a certified house designer course, that's the PHI version, verifier, and a rater course. Then since March, these have been moved online because of the new world we're in. But we were able to work with MassSave and with ICF to get a 50% reimbursement applied to these online courses as well. This wasn't originally in the program because we didn't think to include it. None of these courses were online at the time, but we were able to get them to apply this to the online courses. I will say, we don't know the exact number of people who have applied for these reimbursements and received them. We have well over 100 people that should qualify. And we're hoping most people take advantage of it. But for all you on this tonight, if you've gone through this and you haven't filled out a reimbursement form, do it. You get 50% back, even if it was maybe your company that paid for it, they get the refund back. But make sure you take advantage of this. We really want to make sure that we get these numbers up there high in terms of the people actually taking advantage of the reimbursements. On the bottom of the screen right now, you're seeing the upcoming courses. So these are all upcoming online ones that apply for this program. So how did this happen? Exactly the same way as the incentives happened. Along with the incentives, we asked for this, and this is what was created. As I mentioned, we've been working with ICF, who's the lead vendor for the MassSave program, to develop this. We worked out some details. Many of you came to some of these meetings. Now it would be maybe almost 2 years ago, where we were talking about training opportunities. What would you like to see? And that's where this list of trainings sort of came from. So tonight we're kind of starting that same conversation with you, wanting to know what are the future trainings you want to see when we add to this next year, and hopefully in the years beyond. What do trainings look like? So I was going to do 5 minutes here, but we are kind of running out of time and I don't want to keep people too long. So what I'm going to do is we're going to move through the next part of this presentation, and then we're going to have a longer breakout session at the end to talk about this and the next part of it. I think that seems about right, just to kind of keep things moving along. But keep in mind, any training comments you have, you can share them here a little later as well. So Hank, I'm going to turn it back over to you to just kind of talk about this one piece of state legislation that's kind of come across.
Right. So we mentioned this earlier, but so there's this piece of legislation. There's a House bill and a Senate bill, and they're different. They're in joint conference committee right now, and some people say they're going to pass it before the end of the year, and some people say never. It's never going to happen. But we've posted as part of this some material from MCAN, where you can look at sample letters to write to this committee and urge them to pass it. So that's worth everyone's effort to try to push it. Maybe it can happen before the end of the year. That would be great if it did. And it speaks to some of the language, particularly that MCAN was interested in, is codifying the definition of environmental justice and a new greenhouse gas emission standards for municipal light plants, which are apparently able to still do biofuels and contribute to the greenhouse gases that way. It also, this one's a key to what we'll talk about next, is directing the BBRS to develop a net zero stretch code. Right now, the BBRS is talking about that. They understand that people want them to, but this would require them to do it. And also direct the BBRS to add 4 energy efficiency seats to their energy efficiency committee. There's a lot of politics behind this, but it's kind of like stacking the Supreme Court. We need to get more seats so we can get more sympathetic people onto that board. And then this is where they have the language to remove the cost effectiveness language that's in there now. So that's a tremendous bill. We should push to support it. And you can find a link through MCAN to actually write letters of support. Okay, we can move on from that. Okay, this is the last thing we're going to discuss. So the BBRS is considering a net zero code, but they're doing it kind of kicking and screaming, and they are favoring the AIA net zero code. And there's a lot of people, including the BSA here in Massachusetts, who feel that the AIA zero code is not aggressive enough. It is not aggressive enough in terms of energy efficiency before renewables. It really wants to depend upon renewables. So the NEEP and MCAN and MAPC and Build Environment Plus worked on drafting an easy commercial code, and they've submitted it to the BBRS for consideration. And it puts an emphasis on efficiency and electrification, and also on the additional qualities of renewables. That's one of the issues that people are getting into, is if the renewables that you're qualifying for a project are not really a net add to the system, then they're obviously worth a lot less. So that's been submitted to the BBRS, and as a result of that process, we, Passive House Massachusetts, have become involved in, we'll go to the next slide, Aaron, in working on an easy residential code, because the commercial code picks up the 5 stories and above buildings, and it leaves a huge swath of multifamily and single family buildings that are unaffected by the easy. So if the commercial easy code were passed by the BBRS, it would become the stretch code, but it wouldn't affect thousands of residential units that we deal with day in and day out. So we are working on a comparable document that will be an easy residential code. We intend to submit it to the BBRS by May, and we will see. We're struggling with questions about rehabs. We haven't even, as a committee, we're working on, do we include rehabs? Are they required to be net zero also? Single family homes, net zero for those? Do we use the FIAS 21 prescriptive path? So we're at the very beginning of trying to struggle with this thing, but we will have something to submit by then. In the meantime, I would ask people to look back on our website maybe in a week or two. I just heard this afternoon that the BBRS effectively pushed the easy commercial code to the side to table it because they are pushing the zero code from the AIA. And I'm hoping that we can generate a letter writing campaign to complain about this, and we'll see if it'll have some effect. So that's kind of the last major initiative we're pushing on right now. Aaron, do you want to take it?
Yeah. So as Hank said, that's the last of sort of the initiatives we were updating folks on today. I just want to use the rest of the time to hear from everybody. So about the easy code, about the training program, any leftover feedback from the incentives. Since we have some time, if folks are up for it, I might just do some breakout groups here. The truth is we don't have a lot of people here, but any more, I'm going to do a couple groups so you can discuss for a few moments and we'll come back together as well. Let's see. All right, hello. Everyone's back. So if anybody wants to kind of give some comments about what they were just talking about or continue the discussion here, I'll mention one thing. I was in the room 3 and Bob there had a really good topic about how municipalities really need to get engaged in this, especially around the code discussion. And the more stretch code communities we can see sort of engage and say that they want the stretch code to be raised, they want this to increase, and their community is ready for it, can make a big difference. Everyone else is muted, so if anyone else is trying to talk, you are on mute, but jump in. Michael, go ahead.
I just have one quick
Julie,
question. Sorry. Aaron, sorry.
Yep.
And Bev, you mentioned it too, in terms of embodied carbon or operational carbon. Are you guys aware of a real good calculator for that? Like if I wanted to look at my portfolio, because I'm going to have to look at each state and the way that their energy is produced. But I'm just looking for a really good calculator for that. So. Oh,
you mean for the electric grid?
Yes. Well, yeah. Probably both, right? Because.
Right. Yeah, I can.
But if you, I mean, even if you email it to me later, whatever.
Yeah, I don't have the link right now, but I do have a resource that has the various regional grids and what their conversion factors or whatever would be.
Okay, that would be great.
Julie, do you mean the embodied carbon in the building materials you're proposing? Is that what you're asking about?
No, I'm going to look at operational first, and then I will dig into operational. I mean, then I'll dig into materials, but I just want to get a carbon, footprint based on our operation, and then which grids are greener in the portfolio.
Yeah, and for everyone, I think what Julie's really getting at is that when we're talking about net zero, we want source net zero. So site is the energy you use on site, but where it's produced, say the electric grid, the power plant, it produces about 3 times, depending on where you are, about 3 times as much electricity to produce that electricity at your building. So when we want to be net zero, it's not net zero on the site, it's net zero source. So those conversion factors of how much electricity is lost, which varies grid by grid, is the question.
So I can maybe help Julie. The Heat Smart Alliance just had a meeting on Friday, and I think we've decided to use ISO New England grid numbers for emissions, and that is publicly available. We have someone who works with this stuff for his living, and so with his recommendation, I'm pretty sure that's what we're going to end up doing. So I had another comment if that thread is exhausted.
Go ahead, Mike.
All right. So Bob Higgins Steele from Truro was in my group, and we were both on a phone call yesterday, which is the Roadmap 2030 call. This is the Global Warming Solutions Act. They are trying to put a stake in the ground, decide exactly what the limit is going to be for 2030. They've been hinting at something like 45 or 50% reduction. And they have a massive document coming out at the end of this year that's going to describe this. Now, this, as far as I know, is the legally prescribed mechanism to cause the emissions to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act to be reduced. So somehow this thing and all of the things you're trying to do should be connected and coordinated. In other words, from the building and sector, what they're saying is we need to retrofit 1 million buildings in the next 10 years. Well, they also have some requirements for existing buildings. And I encourage you to look at the August 7th slide deck, particularly slide 5, because that gives you some guidance as to what is going to come out in this roadmap plan. But at any rate, I'd suggest we try to rally around that because everyone's going off with interesting goals, but the state, I think, might be best positioned if we had common goals and commitments.
Great comment. I know, Michael, you had your hand up as well earlier,
well,
so
I
I'm
would
gonna let you get your comment in.
I would just, Matthew, Luke, Aiden, and I were talking about what Hank had been mentioned, which is the gap, where my focus is in residential design and predominantly in additions and renovations. And so a lot of the stuff that's coming through, I really walk by it because it's focused on large multifamily project, kind of projects, which is the sweet spot for the incentives in talking to Luke, he was saying that, you know, there's it's easy to structure, or there's a lot there to structure around that, but more difficult to structure for renovations and additions. So I don't know how we get there. And as a you know, trying to do that's my project window. So trying to do that and be able to implement this. I'd love to have more kind of tools or more kind of even structure to be able to bring that together. But that's just that's where my head is, and anything like that would be great.
Is there something out there, like you drive around and you see buildings that are getting reclad, single family or maybe duplexes, and nobody's doing continuous exterior insulation? And I'm just curious about, like, you know, because I do multifamily, and, you know, if I'm recladding, that's what I do, but it may be less money for me. Is there anything that incentivizes that or requires that? Because if people don't address that while they're recladding, we're never going to hit this carbon neutrality.
Yeah, and that's a great idea, and we should, maybe that's something that we need to push on the kind of requirement side in terms of guidelines and codes. Just because people are selling siding, right? They're going out to sell siding to strip the house, or they top the house, and the residents don't know. You know, they don't know that that's the perfect opportunity to boost your R value and tighten up your building envelope. I mean, those are the first two big steps you can do in terms of improving the performance of the house.
But in the Mass Save incentives, like if you wanted to comment to EEAC that they should be focusing on major improvements. So like, to me, that's renovation, addition, which that program's just been completely undercut right now. And then siding, roofing, and point of sale. When a house is empty between when it's sold and bought, there's the opportunity to go in an aero barrier down to passive levels, add heat recovery, ventilation, insulate everything. And none of their programs really focus on these main big decisions, right? Like the most they do is like a heating system switch out, but they're so vested in gas and the numbers, you know, I don't know.
Well, you know, it's like when we have to do ADA conversion, are you spending 30% of the value of the house on the retrofit? Or are you touching, or like sprinkler systems, are you touching 30% of the ceiling? If you're touching 30% of the ceiling, then you can get a sprinkler system in. I mean, there's like certain triggers, but anybody that's taking cladding off and putting zip wall up, I mean, it's like, make it airtight and get some insulation on there. Or like Bev, like if you're not doing cladding, you can inject foam, right? So anyways, it's sad to see all these fancy buildings in Cambridge that are like getting reclad and nothing is being done about the enclosure.
Well, I am
There's
just
beautiful buildings out there you don't really want them to touch the outside of, right? So that's
the other bucket of buildings,
Yeah.
right? I mean, our house is over 200 years old, and we're not going to change the profile, but we could inject foam in all the cavities, right?
It's not that easy, but okay, yeah.
You know.
No, there's some cool new products, but
I mean,
carbon of them is still not great. So
it's better though, Bev. It's better than it first was.
Yeah, but it still needs to get a lot better.
And I think the opportunity to do this is here. I'm not quite sure how we push for it, because the Mass Save program, it does incentivize some insulation in existing buildings. They'll go in and put cellulose in your building. They'll even put poly down some places. But how do we get them to incentivize exterior, insulation when you're remodeling? I don't know.
Well, and I just wanted to add, that's exactly on the same point. I was kind of thinking as an incentive, the EEAC and the utilities are looking for savings, energy specific savings. Where does this kind of opportunity get best addressed? Is that code? Is that like in the easy code approach, where once you hit a trigger for your house, there are certain things that you need to do, as opposed to, do we target the EEAC and make this as a recommendation to encourage?
I think it has to be sticks and carrots, honestly, but the sticks historically. So right now, a lot of additions should trigger HERS 55 for the whole house being upgraded. I have never seen a code official ask for a HERS rating in Newton, which I think is way better than a lot of other places. So if it's not going to be enforced, like, I mean, that's the silly thing about the baseline in renovations and additions. It doesn't happen that way. Yeah, theoretically, but it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
Before we get too far on, Bob, I know you had your hand up, so just want to make sure you get your point in.
I'm going to lower my hand.
Okay. All right.
But
Quietly back out of the room.
but I'm trying to push triggers, and there's absolutely no excuse if you're gonna. I think in the stretch code originally, if you exposed your roof, the sheathing, and there was no insulation, am I right? You then had to insulate the roof, and I think.
Only if the sheathing is deteriorated and you have to replace it. Then if there's a cavity that's not filled, you have to fill it. But I have never seen a roofer do that.
Right. Well, I think again at the municipal level, and I'll bother you all later about this because this is my first time at one of these. Is you know, and I'm going to be fairly uncomfortable, but I'm going to have a conversation with our building inspector and say, you know, let's start getting on some of this stuff, and not in a confrontational or combative way. It's just, you're so right. I mean,
but you know, like that's the beauty of Passive House, right? Because Passive House has a verifier. Like the building inspector doesn't have to know anything and doesn't even have to know the Passive House is happening. But you got somebody verifying the enclosure, verifying foundation insulation, verifying airtightness. And so that is sort of built in to that. So that, I mean, that's one of the reasons that I think Passive House should be promoted more than it is.
Well, I want to see Passive House as the stretch code. That's, you know, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, let me speak to that for a second. The Passive House we got Passive House as an approved alternative pathway into the EZ commercial code. So Passive House is there. It's not the requirement. In theory, the EZ code commercial got its own requirements that are as strict as Passive House, but there are a whole set of different calculations. And we wanted to avoid a situation where you have a developer who wants to do Passive House, but looks at this stretch code and says, oh my God, that means I'm going to have to do Passive House calculations over here and these other calculations for another code over there. So we got Passive House as an approved alternative, and that's what we want to do with the EZ residential code also. So Passive House will be there. It won't be the code, but it'll be an approved alternative pathway.
But in that situation, you said that the EZ code is as strict as, or has similar goals as the Passive House, where the residential code currently does not. It's nowhere near it.
Correct. And that's why we're writing this EZ residential code, which will be the equivalent of Passive House for these smaller buildings.
Awesome. That's nice.
Hank, is Passive House, isn't that one of the alternative pathways now in the stretch code?
It is for commercial, it is.
Oh, not for residential.
Right, but not for residential.
Well, it is actually a way to get around that also. I mean, it is in the code for single family residential.
Yeah, you can use, for instance, your WUFI modeling to replace your HERS modeling. And you can use a certification for proof of completion.
Yeah, but basically what it does is just simplifies the process for people who are already going Passive House. It does really nothing to encourage people to go Passive House with the code, whereas that's what we want the stretch code to do.
Yeah, I think as Hank was pointing out, it just means that if you're going with Passive House, you're not also required to do other things. you can rely on the passive house process to cover you.
Right, and theoretically, so the new stretch code before it gives you the passive house alternative for the envelope calculations, et cetera, it's telling you that you need to produce a building that goes to net zero. So that's the difference, is that if you're striving for net zero, then passive house is, well on your pathway. So you choose that as your alternative. Right now, the stretch code does have passive house as an alternative approved pathway in it, but there's no incentive to use it because the rest of the code is so loose.
Right.
Can you get to net zero in a single family home without
That's a
passive
very
house?
good question, Julie. That's where
Oh, yeah.
we are, the committee that we're working with, we're struggling with single family and the smaller buildings. I do not want this code to be a net zero for every single family house in the state. I think that's a bridge too far.
Unrealistic.
Unrealistic.
Yeah.
So we are looking at having a cutoff, and we'll build it in pretty much the way the code is now. Single family townhomes having a different approach than larger multifamily buildings that fall outside of the commercial code. But those are some of the things we're struggling with. I don't think we haven't made that decision entirely, but I believe we are not going to require net zero for single family homes. We're not going to require net zero for rehabs, but we're going to try to tighten up what's required for both of those categories.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense because, like my single family house, actually it's a duplex, the shape of the roof and the orientation of the house. I mean, a PV system doesn't even make sense here. And I'm just thinking about, I'm just worried because I was in on all those working committees about the carbon neutrality goals of Boston. And it's like lots of focus on new construction, but there's so many buildings that are going to still be here. And then what about the historic buildings? The historic buildings have me sort of the most, the technology is not out there yet, I don't think, to solve those unless this foam injection becomes cleaner, or people have to decide whether the interior fabric is more historic than the exterior fabric is more historic, and then whatever you do on the inside have to be able to take down, when there's a high R value paint or something that comes up in the future, so we can preserve these buildings. So anyways, I think we're going to have to figure that out quickly. I feel like we've just made huge strides on the new construction. But I think the existing buildings are a real trick.
But when you say historic, do you mean the ones that are historic enough that we would want to preserve them as they are?
Right. If they qualify for historic tax credits, for example, and you can't touch the exterior.
Right. Okay.
That type of thing. That's the final horizon, but let's focus on rehab of non-historic. That probably gets us 90%.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
And I think a code-driven thing, because if it's a code-driven, and I granted it's about application. Beverly mentioned that if it's there but no one's applying it, then it's not really worth anything. But if we can actually get something in the code that says that if you are replacing the siding, if you're removing the siding to redo the siding, that is the perfect time to strip it down to the sheathing, install your air barrier, install a layer of 1/4 inch plywood just to give yourself a subsurface air barrier, make the thing tight, and then work out from there. I mean, honestly, the air barrier, the installation is important, but the air barrier of the two pieces, the air barrier is the bigger piece because there's a lot of moisture problems that are driven by the airflow through the building envelope. And if you do it 90%, you've focused 100% of the moisture that used to come and go in 10% of the area, and that's a source of fungal growth. Yeah.
Right.
We're running a bit out of time, but I do want to give an opportunity if anybody wants to, who hasn't spoken yet, kind of give some of your thoughts. You're sticking around here and listen to the conversation. Really appreciate it. If anybody has any last minute comments there.
I simply want to ask Mike, can you send a link to the roadmap slide deck you mentioned?
I will do that.
Okay, great.
I agree with Mike. That is like the potential thing that could really be a game changer in Massachusetts.
In the sense of aligning all of our goals and
Well,
recommendations.
it's going to make, so Governor Baker set this goal of net zero by 2050. This is what has to happen. And it means like all the agencies, whether it's DHCD funding affordable housing or DCAM funding, what is it called? PACE legislation, or it's like everything the state does. And of course, you know, the state legislature still has to change Mass Save's goal to be net zero 2050 or better and have greenhouse gases be part of it. But it's going to change. It's going to have to require changing a lot of things really fast, and they're not going to be able to ignore it anymore.
Right. That's the beauty of it. This is the cudgel we need to keep beating these folks with.
And specifically that we're going to have to get fossil fuels out of heating, which honestly on these rehab projects, you really have to focus on envelope, or that's really silly with the current pricing of gas and electricity. Yeah. And I mean, that's the other thing that will have to change is the pricing. So like for 15 years, all state policies and DPU policies have favored gas as a transition fuel. For example, in Mass Save, when an oil boiler is upgraded or somebody insulates in an oil, they put that charge on the Mass Save fee that's on electric, which is making electric way more expensive than it should be. Same thing with the transmission for electric in Massachusetts is like higher than anywhere else, except for maybe New York and New England. And it doesn't make any sense because we don't have smart meters even for electric. A lot of these other states who are lower than us have smart meters and have done a lot of transmission upgrades. So like there's a lot of things that just need to be updated for policy for the state and the DPU, and it's going to help us. So that's good.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we've had a great meeting.